Good morning to you, Mark Sept with HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Friday, the 22nd of September, 2017. Of course, today is the anniversary of when Hurricane Hugo came up and made landfall here in South Carolina, very close to, the eye passed over Charleston, but very close to becoming a major catastrophe for the U.S. had it come in just a little further south than Charleston. When the eye passes over your location, generally speaking, especially on the U.S. mainland, that particular spot usually doesn't receive the worst of the surge. It's just to the right of the track. And, if it's a well-organized hurricane like Andrew, it doesn't matter too much because you have this ring of nearly perfect convection. But anyway, today being the anniversary of Hugo, down in Charleston it moved up through Columbia and over Charlotte, and everybody remembers that who was alive back then, one of the legendary hurricanes of all time. And luckily nothing out there like that today. Maria is almost certainly not going to impact South Carolina directly. The jury is still out on whether or not it comes close enough to the Outer Banks and maybe somewhere along the northeast coast, but we're talking very, very slim chances as each hour passes. So this will be fairly short today, just going to kind of show you what's happening. Here's a close-up of what's going on with Maria. Less organized than it was. It's fairly close, the eye, to the Turks and Caicos in here, and fairly decent outflow on the eastern side, but some shear is starting to hit it. The seasons are changing. I guess today is the first day of fall or the last day of summer or something like that. And it's still going to be a warm one in the southeast. It's not going to seem like a sudden flip to autumn or anything, but it's not late August, and we're getting towards the end of the peak of the season, and so you're going to have a little bit more in the way of negative conditions coming in, and that's good. It'll sort of knock down the intensity, hopefully, of whatever hurricanes certainly with Maria now, and then whatever might develop in the future. So going back to the other shot here, Jose is in what we call the post-tropical state, and still trying to develop some convective activity on that northwest side. Hard to imagine how it's doing so over fairly cold water temperatures up there in the 60s and 70s. And as long as it's occupying this space, it definitely knocks down the ridge enough and allows a weakness for Maria to find and more than likely eventually turn out to sea. And that is the likely scenario, but it's not 100% certain. And that's what I was trying to make the point of yesterday. Until it's 100%, it's not 100%. If we look at the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, you notice that this has changed a little bit. Remember when it looked like it was just going to kind of curve out like that? Well, now we have the forecast point for day 5 adjusted back to the north and west a little bit. And remember that the average forecast error at day 5 is over 200 miles. That's the average. So you're going to have some instances, as you understand statistics, that you're going to have average, some forecast points to make up that average more than 200 miles, some are less. That's how you get averages. Nevertheless, the cone of uncertainty is offshore, so that's good news. This will continue, though, to produce swells that will come out, and those will impact the East Coast and the Bahamas and even down towards the Greater Antilles still. And that's been a big problem, even from Jose. I didn't read and see in the news that there were any deaths associated with that. Believe it or not, rough surf, rip currents created by passing tropical cyclones, those statistics regularly show up when you look at a pie chart of deaths attributed to tropical cyclone impacts. Surf is in there, and usually it's more than wind, believe it or not. So we always have to respect what's happening in relation to the high waves that come out, these swells. They're beautiful for surfers, usually, and not so good for people that really don't understand what they're up against. So this is one of the reasons why I say it's not over till it's over. This is the GFS Ensemble package from the 0Z run last night, I think. Let me just back out and make sure. Yep, that's correct. So we'll look at the broad picture first, and you can see as clear as I can that the envelope of the ensemble members for the most part is this way. But what about these right here? Until all of them show an offshore out to sea track, and I want to zoom in here and show you, I'm not going to say that this has no chance to hit the United States. A couple of the ensemble members come up. There's probably 3 of them in here, fairly close to the Outer Banks, and then one of them kind of looks like it goes right over, and then everything's turning. You have one member up here into Nova Scotia. There's a few ensemble members into Newfoundland. All right, and even out here, there's several. And that's important because the pattern at 5 days can change so that this comes closer to the United States coastline and creates more of an impact. It doesn't have to cross land to create the ultimate impact. I mean, you could have the core just offshore by 20 miles and have a significant storm surge pile up, for example, along the Pamlico Sound on the North Carolina Outer Banks. We're sending it into Norfolk as an example. So that's all. We're not wish casting this into the United States. It doesn't matter. Even if I was completely pro hurricane landfall and was always talking about, I hope they hit. Of course, people would be very upset by that. But it doesn't matter what I think or hope or wish. It doesn't. We don't have any control over that. I'm just showing you what the guidance is suggesting, and some of the guidance still shows an impact directly along the North Carolina coast. And this is going to change. I mean, for goodness sakes, Maria is still down here. It hasn't even reached 25 degrees latitude yet. All right? So it's still fairly far to the south. And since it's not passing by our latitude, way out here in the open Atlantic, once it gets out here, then we can say, okay, it's not going to hit. And that's important. All right? So this is important, too. As we end the traditional peak to the season, we come back down off of that rapid ramp up that started around August 20th or so, right around the time of the eclipse, which is purely coincidental, I promise. But, that's interesting. Ever since the eclipse, the tropics and the Atlantic have just gone berserk. But it is coincidental, so we'll leave it at that. The velocity potential here, basically, if it's this color, the air is sinking. We call it subsidence. And when it's this color on this particular map, and this is provided by Ben Noel Weather out of New Zealand. I've been following him for the last few months, and I really like New Zealand right down there. Can you believe it? I've been following Ben's work, and I really appreciate how simple he puts things out there. Stuff that I can understand, even though some of it's beyond my realm of knowledge as a physical geographer. But nevertheless, what does this show? It shows that as we get through the next month or so, through the end of October almost, substantial rising motion in the Western Caribbean, where it should be that time of year. Okay? So things are going to shift once Maria does what it does, which will probably be something like that. We got to look over here. And that'll be about a 3 to 4 week window where maybe 3 storms will develop. Wouldn't surprise me at all. A couple of hurricanes and probably 1 major. That's just gut feeling. Based on what we've seen already, this right here will be the area to start watching. And as we dip these troughs down into the U.S., some of that activity could get pulled north into the Gulf of Mexico. If you have enough ridging that comes over the southeast and the trough stays over here, then this stuff could just go on over into Mexico. You never know. But the pattern's going to change, and we will be done, for the most part, with the tropical waves coming in from the east and developing. They will wait a little bit longer and probably develop in the Western Caribbean as the pattern changes and pressure is lower there. The natural tendency is for that to happen. So we'll have the 12Z runs of the models coming up, the GFS and the Euro. So later this afternoon, I don't know, around the 5 o'clock advisory package from the National Hurricane Center, I'll do another video, and we'll take a look closely and compare and contrast the GFS versus the European and see if there are any dramatic shifts to the west as they interact with what goes on with Jose, or not. It's that simple, so we'll take a look at it later. Until then, have a great rest of your Friday morning. I appreciate you tuning in. I'm Mark Sutherth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll talk to you again in a little under 8 hours.